first. Thank you for the kind introduction, Christina. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, and I pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation from the land where I work and live. My presentation today focuses on wheat and palm, which are amongst many international commodities the world use and consume. They are outcomes of appropriation and exploitation of nature and labor from indigenous people, past and present, here in Australia and many parts of the world. I pay my respects to all indigenous people. Thank you all for your interest in my research. Let me start with the word gastro. If I said, I'm feeling rather poorly, I have gastro. Gastro here is a short version of gastroenteritis, the inflammation of the stomach and intestinal tract, which causes vomiting, diarrhea, also known as stomach flu. So gastro stomach is the word which came from ancient Greek gastro, but there's another meaning of gastro. It means womb. While this meaning is less known or used, it is very relevant to gastro-capitalism, but I'll come back to this later. There are three existing terms which uses gastro, and they are key to the political economy of the globalization of food. They all highlight the role of the state and corporations in carrying out the activities centered on food with economic or commercial value, with the intent of using foreign societies as markets. The term gastro-nationalism can be traced back to two presentations by William J. Swartz in the annual meeting of Midwest Sociological Society in the US, according to Kayla D'Souza. It was in this paper in 2010 when she defined the term. Let me read out the quote to you. By using food as the material vehicle of national identity, gastro-nationalism measures the power and resources of cultural, political, and economic identities as they shape and are shaped by institutional protection, and this is key. The protection referred to are these European Union sponsored labels to secure economic and commercial rights by emphasizing the place of origin and traditional food products. Note here that the reference are on food, not cuisine, or culinary, which gastro-diplomacy crosses into. Both gastro-nationalism and gastro-diplomacy are both about building national identity and branding of a country. The term gastro-diplomacy first appeared in this article in The Economist in 2002, and it is about Thailand's initiative to increase the number of Thai restaurants worldwide as a way to use national cuisine to increase the likability of the country in promoting tourism. Other countries soon followed. But the term gastro-diplomacy was defined by Paul Rockefeller in the Center of Public Diplomacy blog as the act of winning hearts and minds through stomach. Here, the emphasis is the word stomach, leaving a broader reference to food, not only limited to dishes from a particular country. Gastro-colonialism is a serious issue, but how the term came about is not quite what you expect. Dr. Craig Santos Perez is a Chamorro indigenous poet and environmental activist from the Pacific island of Guam. In this book, he wrote about the prevalence of colonialism food in the islands in the form of canned meats like Spam, Vienna sausages, canned corned beef. In an interview in 2015, he said that the idea came after he had overindulged on Spam, became really bloated, and needed someone to blame for his explosive diarrhea. Let me read out his words. I figured out that since colonialism was responsible, okay, sorry about this. I am, here we go. Sorry about this, guys. There's a technology issue here. Let me just read out this to you. Since colonialism was responsible for other ills in the Pacific, I conjectured that there must be a link between the empire and my intestines. That is how I came up with the word gastro-capitalism, the colonization of our bowels with imported fatty, greasy, unhealthy foodstuff. So, and let me just, for a moment, let me just address this technology issue, guys. Thanks for your patience. Mm. Yeah. There we go. We're back in action. To better understand the relevance and limitation of these three gastro terms in relation to globalization of food, I will apply them to the case study of my research on Australian wheat and Indonesian instant noodles. Let's think of gastro-nationalism and the protection and branding of food based on country of origin. Which countries would the two main ingredients of instant noodles, wheat and palm oil, be associated to? You may have guessed Indonesia or Malaysia, because 87% of palm oil in the international market is produced by these two countries. Oil palm originates from the African continent. What about wheat? You may think that it is from Europe, perhaps given that it is associated with colonial food like bread. But wheat is one of the plants that was domestic some 10,000 years ago, which gave birth to agriculture in the Levant region, east of the Mediterranean Sea. It is the indigenous grain of present-day Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Cyprus, and Egypt. Yet these countries no longer produce enough wheat to sustain their own domestic use and have become wheat import dependent. This has been contributed by climate change and conflict. Wheat arrived in Australia from England on the first fleet in 1788. The settlers brought grains of wheat to be cultivated for the colony to be food self-sufficient. Oil palm was brought to Indonesia by the Dutch, establishing plantations in the island of Sumatra during their colonization. Australia experienced gastro-colonialism through wheat in the form of flour as part of rations. Along with sugar and tea, they were used as payment for labor of indigenous people. Well, an example of gastro-diplomacy is United States Agricultural Trade Development Assistance Act, Public Law PL 480. It permitted the president to authorize the donation of surplus food, commodities like wheat, to friendly nations, either on concession or grant terms. Even though it was only passed by Congress in 1954, US have been using food as a strategy on international affairs for many years before that. The invention of instant noodles had been a result of wheat donated by the US to Japan after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. US wheat continued to flow as food aid during the Cold War, particularly to Southeast Asia to win allies against communism. The establishment of instant noodles in Indonesia has a sinister connection with the coup d'etat in 1965, led by Suharto, supported by the US and its allies, to topple President Sukarno, known for his communist value. The fall of Sukarno gave way to the extermination of communism in Indonesia, which resulted in one of the worst massacres in the country. The link to instant noodles, aside from the donated wheat from US, is Suharto's close link to Lim Sao Liang, who owned Indofood, the company that produces the ubiquitous brand Indomie, and Bogasari Flour Mill in Jakarta. When Bogasari opened in 1971, it was the biggest in the world. This article by Joe Clifford demonstrates the use of national identity in the strategic marketing of Indonesia's most popular instant noodle brand, as well as the adaptability of flavors to the many local cuisine across the archipelago. Thank you, Joe, for attending the seminar today. The acceptability of instant noodles by many ethnic groups throughout the little sachets have all contributed in making Indonesia the second largest instant noodles consuming country in the world. It is supported by trade liberalization, structural adjustment policies enforced by international agencies like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, which cause imported wheat to be cheaper than the staples that are locally produced. On one hand, instant noodles may be affordable, which addresses food insecurity, particularly for those living in poverty. But the gravity of the issue is that the farmers are no longer able to compete with cheap imports and sought to work as low-skilled and low-paid labor. Furthermore, wheat required for the instant noodles cannot grow in the tropical climate, making Indonesia wheat import dependent. A combination of weakening of local agriculture and heavy reliance on staple food put the country and its people in a vulnerable position. With over 75% of the value of wheat in the international market dominated by these 8 wheat exporting countries, food security is threatened not only by changing weather conditions, but also by geopolitics. All except Russia are members of the Allies of North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. And palm oil, being the second main ingredient for instant noodles, is the cause of deforestation, the loss of biodiversity. Jungles converted into palm oil, into oil palm plantation, is a loss of traditional food source for indigenous communities. The issue is explained by Sophia Chow in her article, which draws on the experience of the Marine people in West Papua, who were encouraged to consume instant noodles as a replacement for food that they would have otherwise hunted or foraged from the jungle. This is an example of gastro-colonialism that is currently occurring at present. Unlike gastro-colonialism experienced by Australian Indigenous people over 100 years ago, it does not have a face because it is a system. Wheat, palm oil, and other commodities are part of the global capitalist food system, whose actors are not from any particular country, race, or ethnicity, but they're international shareholders. It is supported not just by states and corporations, but also international agencies. The system profits not from all aspects of the trade, from production to consumption, but also from the social ramification in the process. The capitalist system uses the world population not only as markets, but also for their labor. This is why I am proposing gastro-capitalism as a term which explains the totality of control of the capitalist system over food, which is particularly unique. The capitalist system, through the globalization of food, have manufactured vulnerabilities across different geographies for the continuation of condition, for the optimal appropriation and exploitation. The different vulnerabilities impacting on different geographies at different time, while often seen as separate issues, are in fact the very components which have been capitalized by the system. Over time, they collectively contribute to the deteriorating conditions of global ecology, politics, economy, and social structures. All affect health of societies through food. The availability, accessibility, and affordability of wheat and instant noodles affect food security. However, there is a component that adds to the complication of the issue, that is the acceptability of that is especially commercially designed to appeal to the wider population, like instant noodles, which is a form of ultra-processed food. It is cheap, convenient, and generally have a relatively long shelf life, which enables vast accessibility even to rural and remote areas. Its taste and texture have been invented to have high desirability, which lead to overconsumption and even cause addiction. The rise of consumption of ultra-processed food, high in content sugar, fat, and salt, is correlated to the epidemic of diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular diseases, which are amongst the top 10 leading causes of death in the world. The adaptability of the flavors to suit the palate of its target market makes instant noodles extensively well received by different populations around the world. This is problematic as it is as the contrived let me read this out to you. This is particularly problematic as the contrived gravitation have been artificially constructed for a commercial intent. Efforts to persuade against the consumption of instant noodles is challenging as a result. Gastro-capitalism can provide different perspectives to understand the correlation between disease and ethnic groups, and one key factor is diet. This chapter on ethnicity and health by Christina Ho in the book A Sociological Approach to Healthy Determinants explains the prevalence of certain diseases in certain ethnic groups, which are determined by factors such as class. With the affordability of instant noodles, it makes the food item particularly complex because whilst it's associated to people in the lower socioeconomic group, it actually cuts through class and ethnicity. And this is explained by Amita Vaviska's article on India's experience with Maggi instant noodles, where it became the food item that cuts across caste system. With this insight, policymakers, researchers may look beyond the existing scope and parameters to better understand population health. So where does it come to? Food is an essential need for human survival, and therefore it is integral to human rights. Food is the connector between the capitalist system through the stomach. The capitalist system needs labor to function, and this is connected to the womb. The appropriation of cheap nature to produce cheap wheat, for the production of cheap instant noodles to feed cheap labor and to give birth to the next generation of workers needed and exploited by capital to maximize profit, is the cycle of gastro-capitalism. Food is not just for satiety or free from hunger, it is also a source of nutrients. Humans must have the right to adequate nutrition in order to meet the need for the right to health. But just by looking at wheat and instant noodles with environmental damage caused by industrial agriculture and the health implication from the consumption of instant noodles, we really need to question the system that determines the world's population's right for its very basic needs. Let me leave you with a final food of thought. What other food item that is in your daily consumption that links your gastro to capitalism? Thank you.